When I first announced I was downshifting my career, I had, clocked in a decade in brand strategy. I'd just gone to Stanford Business School. I landed on paper what was my dream
I
job.
felt like I had to justify my choices to everybody, including myself.
You are an independent human who also deserves to grow. And how can you set yourself up with success metrics that then let you be able to create rhythms that serve you to grow?
I try not to share my reasons, and I remind myself that my reason for not doing X or Y is simply because I want to.
I think we want to break it down to not just how you step into this choice, but how do you then navigate that choice with more confidence and a sense of possibility.
Dinesh, today's episode is one I'm really, really excited about. You know why?
Why?
Because this episode is for anyone who knows a mom, including, their own mom. The show is for anyone who does not have children. This episode is for anyone that has kids or works with people who do. She brings in just such a wealth of insight and perspective and reframes to help us all function better in society. Neha, welcome.
Thank you so much. That was so kind. I'm delighted.
Neha Ruch is the founder of Mother Untitled, which is the leading platform for ambitious women leaning into family life. She has sparked meaningful, supportive conversations that catalyze a shift in how society views stay-at-home motherhood through her work that has served hundreds of thousands of women and the communities in which those women live. Neha, your work has been featured in Forbes, in Time, in Oprah Daily, in Motherly, in Vogue, and so many more incredible places. This is just incredible. And you actually have a new book coming out, The Power Pause, that's coming out soon, right?
So soon, not soon enough, but yes, it's coming out in January of 2025.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We're excited.
Same. I wish this was in person, but this will have to do.
Your wish might come true. We have the power to make that happen by way of potentially a happy and human event sometime in the future.
Ooh, I love hearing that.
We'd love to have you as a guest. And so we're teasing the audience on purpose here. But Neha, tell us, what did we leave out? Who is Neha Ruch behind the bios and the book and everything? What makes you tick? And because I really think that's where the inspiration lies.
We were talking a little bit about the sort of focus of the show to highlight the Southeast Asian diaspora. And I think, maybe we can start there, right? I immigrated to the States from Bombay when I was 4. To a little town outside of Boston. And I actually just had to put this into context, I had a girls' weekend, which might be why I'm quite tired today, with 8 of my friends from home. We see each other every year. And I say that because I have some wonderful friendships from that town. And it was an all white town. And I was, obviously one of the very few people of color. I think I spent a lot of time in those years sort of figuring out. I think belonging was really hard. I think that's a shared experience among so many of us. And, I think it lends sort of to this work in that I think a lot of sort of proving myself came from my career. And, when I chose to pause my career, which we're going to get into, because obviously it sort of lives at the heart of the work I do, I think that sense of identity came up again. And so, that's what I'm passionate about, is really figuring, overthinking other people's problems and my own. I can do that for ages. And so I chose to take on, what is our relationship with work, and why do women feel so much shame in the choices we make around work and family? Why is one choice perceived as better? Why do we sort of inherit these flawed narratives? Where do they come from? And, breaking it down. And I love words. I always wanted to be a writer, but never took that path. So, it was sort of motherhood that gave me permission to explore that. And obviously that's how my work has sort of come to be. And I think that'll, that probably aligns with both of you too, is sort of when you step away from sort of the traditional path, that can open up some really interesting spaces. And outside of that, I have 2 kids. I have a Bodhi and a Lila, like you guys, a boy and a girl, and a dog named Coconut.
I love that. Your story of being one of the onlys, I guess, is what I've heard it referred to as, is one that I come from a small town in Texas, one of the onlys as well. I know Dinesh has done a lot of work in the DEI space. And so we're thrilled that you're doing a lot of the work that you do, which is what I kind of wanted to get into. As I was prepping for this particular episode, I was so excited because it made me really reflect on my own experiences. And, the listeners may or may not remember this or know this. I know I've shared it here and there, bits and pieces, but I remember even when I first was dating my husband and we decided to get married, I told him, I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And I was already in dental school. We'd already spent all this money, educating myself and all of these things. But there were a lot of reasons why. I just knew I wanted to stay at home when I became a mom, right? I was very clear about that. And, even though I was upfront about it with him and he was very supportive, people had things to say, right? And they had things to say before we got married. They had things to say after we got married, before we were even pregnant. People had things to say when we were pregnant, after we were, had the baby. And it was incredible to me how much we encountered resistance and how much everybody wanted to make our decision something of a problem for them that they then needed to insert themselves into and fix. And not with any bad intentions, but really truly thinking that they were helping us, helping the baby, all of these things, right? Like all done out of love. But it was hard. It was really hard to justify. I felt like I had to justify my choices to everybody, including myself. That was so hard to think to myself. And it showed up, right? Like my husband's better than me, that patriarchal learning how my mom and how they have their marriage and being subservient, and he makes the money while I just stay at home. And and I really wish I had someone like you, Neha, in my sphere at that time, because, you said women pausing for family life, they don't give up on a successful and growing career. They just trust that they have decades of work ahead and that this decision will lead to the next right thing. And I think if I had absorbed those words, then it would have just, oh my gosh, because it's so true. I'm living proof of that. And so I want the listeners to understand, what is it of your experience that has given you this invaluable insight to give yourself permission to trust the process, to know that amazing things are coming our way, even though we take a pause in motherhood?
Well, first of all, I'd just say that I think your experience is so shared. I think, when I first announced I was downshifting my career, I had, clocked in a decade in brand strategy. I'd just gone to Stanford Business School. I landed on paper what was my dream job. And, when I shared that I wanted to downshift my career, enjoy my first child, and I hadn't had so much of a explicit vision. Like I had just known I wanted to be a mother. And so I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised when I was rocking with my son at 3 o'clock in the morning. And like one hand, I was like reaching the ends of the internet on Instagram. And I just felt so much peace. I really did. And I think it's important to call out, because whether you return to paid work or decide to pause, or you're sort of existing in between, I don't actually think I don't think, I know the data shows that there's no one better choice for the child, as long as the child feels like they have a secure home and a consistent caregiver and a loving caregiver. And so I actually made that choice very much for me. I really felt a lot of peace. And as we talked about, I think I'd been looking for belonging for so long. And then in my career, I'd been striving for so long, that this idea that this little being just wanted me was so beautiful. Like it just felt relieving. And I felt like decades of pressure had just been lifted off my shoulders. So I was very excited and sharing with everyone that I was going to initially shift to consulting 2 days a week. And then eventually I would pause. But immediately I heard, from a really, like, similar to you, loving, involved members of our community and friend circle and family, like, are you giving up in some way? Are you going to be bored all day? less well intended. I heard from people, did you take a spot at business school if this is all you're going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And there's, I think in those moments, I was always someone who was very susceptible to other people's feedback
Yeah.
and their perceptions of what I was doing. And it was the first time I felt very clear on what I was doing. And I think I felt very emboldened by that. I don't think that that's everyone's experience. I still had to do a lot of growing in sort of separating out these people's feedback from my sort of self-worth. And so but it led me to this, right? So Mother Untitled was born out of, you have to remember that also when I was having Bodhi, it was the height of the lean in movement
Mhm.
and the girl boss era. And so there was a lot of incredible, it was almost like the second wave of feminism had crescendoed into this big moment.
Mhm.
And it was amazing of a celebration of women in power. And it sort of cast undue shame on anyone choosing something different for a
Mm.
chapter. And so I started Mother Untitled at that moment as the first representation of what it could be like to be an ambitious woman and pause or shift paid work for family. And that was, I think a lot about how it's like it's sort of that evolution was born out of that one bold choice and having to navigate through other people's perceptions and make sense of it. But the
Yeah.
work wouldn't have been the work without that.
I wanted to ask your thoughts on something. And I think that everything you're doing is fantastic. I think the lens through which you do it, which is pausing paid work and whether you decide to go forward from a family perspective, I think that's great. But what I'm starting to notice a little bit and this is a gross generalization, is relying on outside societies validation for what choices we make, right? And letting that determine how we show up or how we do, right? And I think everyone chooses a different path, right? And so I'm educated as an attorney. And if I wake up one day and say, you know what, I just want to stop practicing law, I want to buy a lawn mowing business and do that, um, I will get some of the same questions, like, what are you doing? Why did you go to law school? Like, how could you give up a financial side of it? Is that even fair to your kids? Like, what are you doing? Um, and so I've moved personally to a place where I try not to share my reasons. And I remind myself that my reason for not doing X or Y is simply because I want to, right? And whether it's because I want to have a family or because I want to take my kids somewhere else, or if I just don't want to do something, um, I find that sharing the reason opens me up to that judgment and and opinion. And I think we can all agree there's always an opinion, right? Whether you have a
Mm-hmm.
kid or you don't have a kid, you work or you don't work, you have a job or you start a business, there's always an opinion. And would you say that that's fair from like an overarching perspective of what your platform is aimed to assist with or to empower people to not to make the choice that's best for them and not rely so much on what you're expected to do or what society thinks is right for them, because oftentimes their judgment's a reflection of something that's coming up for them, right?
Yes, and I would say when you inherit a narrative from culture, right?
Mhm.
So the narrative around stay-at-home motherhood or a chapter of stay-at-home motherhood.
Yeah.
And I get into this in the first chapter of the book, but you can sort of look at what happened over the years since the 1970s. And we were basically looking at a generation of women who wanted to prove our worth in the workplace and open up
Mhm.
opportunities, which was absolutely incredible. But what we did was we sort of left anyone who was choosing family life, even just for a chapter, at home with the June Cleaver archetype, right?
Mhm.
But in
Mhm.
reality, and this was sort of what really spawned Mother Untitled, was if you look around in the time since the 1970s, you're looking at women who are having children an average of age of 30. So they've clocked in about 7 years of career or work
Right.
experience prior. They have more equitable relationships with their partners. Fathers are spending 3 times the amount of time with their children than any generation prior. They have access to digital tools and technology. So they're able to participate in volunteering, online certifications, passion projects. They're able to stay connected to the workforce. And so we never updated the perception. And so what I seek to do is reveal a more dynamic, multifaceted image of who this parent is who is making these choices, and show the much more fluid narrative of work and family so women can feel empowered to make the right choice that's right for them and their family, but also
Mhm.
have the language to be able to then walk through with their head held high and answer questions like, what do you do on the playground and still feel confident? Or
Mhm.
be able to navigate finances with their partner with more dignity, right? So while we can say, oh, it's just about doing what's right for you, what's happened is you take the cultural narrative, and then in practicality, unless the household and culture is educated, the partner working out of the home for pay feels like they have more control over
Mm.
the over the
Mhm.
household income, right? When in reality, what I would do in in that section, in that sort of section of life as it relates to the chapter of pausing, is say that no, you're actually an interdependent household, right? So
Right.
let's assign
Mhm.
value to caregiving, because that partner who's single tasking out of the home is actually depending on the partner working in the home, and so by that measure, joint the household income is joint, right? And so I guess to answer your question, yes, broad strokes, we want to empower people to make the right choice and give them language and practical steps they can take so that they can have financial conversations that make them feel more dignified, so that they can feel empowered to invest in health, because so often women feel like, oh, there's no value to what I'm doing in the home, I don't deserve help
Yeah.
anymore, right? So,
Yeah.
I think we want to break it down to not just how do you step into this choice, but how do you then navigate that choice with more confidence and a sense of possibility.
I love that you said that. I mean, this is not a new conversation in terms of, well, you're home. So do you really need a housekeeper?
Mm,
You're home. Do you really need Instacart? Why can't you just go to the grocery store? Right. Like these are all elements and facets that as we as women have told ourselves, I'm not earning anymore. I'm dependent. And I love how
mm,
you said interdependent. Because yes, logically, I mean, what is it that you add up all the things that moms do and it's like $250,000 a year or something in work.
184,000. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. So it's not a small amount. Yet we do feel a lot of guilt, particularly, I can't speak for another cultural lens, but for me as a South Asian, um, I'm an only child. And so I got a lot of girls do this, right? They cook, they make the rotli, they make the cha in the morning, they eat all of this stuff. And then you're left kind of trying to reconcile, I have this degree. I don't feel like I need the support, but I don't feel like I deserve the support. All of these things. And so I love that you talk about interdependency and really empowering the women and the men, or I would say rather even broadly the partner, whichever that is, whether the dads stay at home, you know.
Mhm.
Well, one in
Um,
five I'm glad you called that out, because I should say that one in five stay-at-home parents right now are dads.
Mhm.
So that's a very nuanced dialogue, because obviously from like the gender expectation
sure.
is different, and the dynamic in the household is different. But I do want to call that out.
Yeah. And I thank you for sharing that stat because I think it's pretty cool.
When you say 1 in 5 dads are stay at home, you mean that they're physically at home and potentially working or running a business, or that they are not employed for paid for?
They are currently not working for pay.
Got it. Okay.
They're
Yeah,
at-home
that's
parents. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's great. And do you have the stats for the shift over the years for more, wholesome approach to both pay income generation activities as well as
Mm,
family type stuff? And I think
mm,
with after post pandemic with the advent of Zoom or things like that, and I'm an example of that, I work from home, right? And
mm-hmm,
so this week right now my wife is at the hospital, and I could go pick up the kids. I'll take the kids for soccer, things like that. And I think a lot of dads and whoever the non-income generating or income generating parent is, there's more of a blending of that responsibility right
mm-hmm.
now.
I think that what we can say is dads deserve a rebrand too. I think, like I said, I think that just the time spent has gone up. I think I have a colleague in the space, Eve Rodsky, who founded the Fair Play Institute and wrote a book called Fair Play that came out in 2020 and sort of paved the way for a real examination of what goes into running a household and
Mhm.
how individual families can make shifts toward more equitable sharing of the
Yeah.
household. And I do think that that has shifted, I think, by nature of, and it only more so since anecdotally, since post pandemic, because just more availability and time spent.
Yeah.
Um, I think, one thing, Seema, that you just said that I want to comment on is this idea that women are in this trap of, and women, especially on career pauses, are in a trap around high expectations of
Mhm.
what they're going to do in the home now, and
Mhm.
then disdain if they invest in help. And I
Mhm.
think, the middle section of the book, I sort of really focus on, thriving in the day to day, because part of it is not only do we want to, yes, empower women to make the right choice, but then we want to set themselves up to realize that this is also a time for their growth alongside their
Yes.
kids. I think so
Yes.
often women step into this chapter, and the first thing that happens is, because we have had previously no roadmap for how would I navigate a career path strategically, then if they're not doing paid work, there's no sort of tangible success metric, because previously it was just like salary bumps and title raises. Um, and in the absence of that, it becomes very quickly a clean home,
Mhm.
a really happy children and well-behaved children. And we all know, or maybe your kids are idyllic, I don't know. It certainly looked like it when I saw the picture, but like attaching your success to your children's behavior is like a recipe
Yeah.
for failure, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
inevitably they will surprise you. And that's part of the surprise and delight campaign that is parenting. Like they will grow. And our job and our sort of success metric is staying healthy and happy and whole and being able to bear witness to that. But, I think one of the big pieces is being able to know that you are an independent human who also deserves to grow. And how can you set yourself up with success metrics that then let you be able to create rhythms that serve you to grow, right? And to let go of the things that you don't need to do because it doesn't really, if cooking every single day isn't going to, serve the overarching family goals and individual goals, then maybe that's the thing you let go of, right?
Right.
And so I think a lot of it is knowing what you're optimizing for this chapter, setting up
Mhm.
sort of rhythms that include you in them,
Mhm.
um, and working sort of within the family systems to figure out, okay, how do we invest in whatever those resources are, whether that is, services or community help or unpaid family help, to really be able to get the time and breaks. I think the saddest thing that I've seen, we commissioned a survey called the American Mothers on Pause Survey, with 1,200 stay-at-home moms across the country, and 30% had never used any assistance,
Mm.
including family help, which means 1 in 3 parents had like literally just done this completely by themselves, which is, no one should have to do any job 24/7
Yeah.
without breaks.
Yeah.
And
That
so a
was
lot of it is reshaping their sense of, this is a time that I deserve to be healthy and whole as well.
I'd like to give you the floor to speak to the partners, right?
Mm,
yeah.
Because a lot of times, what I have perceived to be the experiences of a lot of people is that they're caught, like you said, between this trap of thinking that they should hold on to their career, but they also genuinely want to cook dinner every night and be part of the homework and things like that. And what I see sometimes is the partner, the man, is encouraging the help. Like let's call the babysitter, and various levels of rationale are given, like, oh, it's not worth the money, like it's just, $200 to go to a movie is not worth it, or I could do this, or we don't need that person, things like that. And sometimes it feels that you're now getting into this argument about
mm,
getting some help,
mm,
not so the mom or the caring parent can go back to work, but just that so they can have time for themselves. And what I saw recently, might have been something I was reading for you, is that what is sacrificed is your positive influence on the family household because you're stressed or whatever. And my family, we have tons of help, both paid and unpaid help in the family. And just recently, that someone said to me, and it was a fleeting thought, but it really stuck with me. And they said, "What a beautiful gift for your marriage," right? And
Mm.
really thought about that, and it's like, it really changes how we show up when we do show up
Mhm.
in the time, as opposed to, you know, if I said something like, "Yeah, I've got to go change the oil in the car. I've got to mow the lawn,
Mhm.
and we just have to rush through dinner," right? Like that's the corollary, all the things I choose to do. Instead, I'll let Jiffy Lube change the oil in my car. Right? I'm not giving up my Saturday. I'm sorry, right? What is the conversation? Give us the language. Give the non-caring partner the language to be able to move past some of that, what might be guilt, what might be this trap, what might be whatever you are perceiving or you've seen in the research, to bring the help in so that no person is trapped between this, expectation and guilt or obligation, whatever flavor you want to call it.
This concept that you said, which is our family deserves us both to be our healthiest selves, right? And that's always been, sort of the most convincing data point, convincing talk track
Mm,
for women, which is, there's mixed reviews on that because someone says, well, why is that the only thing that convinces a woman if it's better for someone else? But ultimately, you deserve this, I think would be the thing that I would say, because I think women do need to hear that.
Mhm.
That I think the cultural programming that only paid work deserves paid help is so deeply embedded
hmm
that having the partner who's working out of the home say, recognize her value, saying, I could not do any of this without you. You deserve a break.
Yeah.
We
Mhm.
deserve this break.
Mhm.
Or I am missing you. We need this time, right? I think that's the other part. So I think that you deserve a break. You deserve support. You are doing a lot, and I am depending on you for a lot. I
hmm
think the sort of invisible labor of running a household, the cognitive labor of running a household is even more significant today than it has been in any generation prior, right? Because of mental health diagnoses, complex healthcare systems, complex education systems, right? There's so much that goes into caregiving that never existed previously. So
Mhm.
oftentimes, if a woman is just going through, or a parent at home is just going through the motions of getting it all done, having someone mirror back to her and reflect back to her that that work is seen, that that work is valued, and that she deserves a break,
hmm
and that you want that break with her, I think goes a long way. And I think the second part, what's interesting is I have spoken to many women for whom the partner does not understand
hmm
why they
Yes.
need help.
Yes.
And in that case, what's interesting is when they have together said, like, let's sit down and budget for it on a monthly basis. Let's just go through the budget and decide that this is how much we're going to invest. It is then the partner who comes back around and says, oh, wow, I noticed that the burden is less on me.
hmm
Like, I feel like I can enjoy the partner working out of the home will finally have this
Yeah.
like moment of recognition, like, oh, I can enjoy, you're expecting less of me because you're more supported. So I think the inverse is true too in the situation where you described, where the partner who wants the help might say, this is going to help the whole household. I know it's
Mm.
going to help me. Because I think being able to own that also reminds her that the investment in help is not just for her. Because
Right.
I think too
Mhm.
often we're like, oh, well, I don't deserve to invest that. Like, I think when we realize, wait a second, it's for everyone, it goes a
Yeah.
long way.
Well,
And I'll just
Mhm.
share that, I was a little resistant to paid help. I think I always, um, I think in the beginning it was because I didn't want to let go. I thought that that was sort of
Mhm.
my entire identity was like, oh, I'd taken my identity from work and put it into, then I realized, well, like something's got to give, and I can enjoy this more if I get breaks. But the thing that really got me was seeing that my child could also benefit from other loving adults taking care of him. And I think that, I was also an only child, Seema. We had just immigrated to the country. We didn't have the privilege at the time for help. And I remember just being always terrified something was going to happen to my parents. I was terrified because I didn't know that there were other loving adults who could take care of me. And so I think about that a lot. I don't know if I would go there on the talk track as the as the partner, but I think that it is something I think about a lot, that not only is it a gift to our household and to me and my husband, but it's a gift to the kids too.
Yeah.
Also what you said, something really resonated with me, and what has been enlightening for me is, I mean, there is a level of, I don't want to call it guilt, but a feeling that someone else is, pulling a load at home that you're not able to contribute to. And by relieving that load, you both can have
Enjoy it.
a different, more enjoyment. But the thing that I want to point out is something from my own personal experience is I've been a practicing attorney for about 20 years. And when you start out being an attorney or any profession, like the learning curve is steep. And then somewhere around year 10 or 12, like it levels off. You know what you're doing, right? You get to a certain point. Parenting, on the other hand, is not like that. The learning curve is always steep. And, just this weekend, my wife went down to Orlando for she was at a conference. And so I was single dadding it the entire weekend. Ballet. I took my daughter to ballet. She didn't want to go to ballet, so we had to come back home in the rain. And then we were doing my kids' homework on the computer, and the computer wouldn't work. My point is that paid work outside of, unless you're constantly changing professions and starting companies, things like that, but for most regular tenured career tracks, right, the difficulty tends to level off by way of challenges. Whereas when you're in the house and you're taking care of either aging parents or growing kids, I feel like the difficulty you never become good at it to where it becomes easy, which I think is another realization of, like, hey, like, this is something that you will never best. Like, you will never get so good at it to where you can take your foot off the gas and relax. Whether it's your kids sleeping through the night, or potty training, or dating, or drugs, or cigarettes, or social media, or college applications, right?
Yes.
It doesn't end. And I will say too, like, going back to this comment of, we're constantly judging ourselves. Most of the listeners here, they're incredibly high performing. They're incredibly goal oriented. Check off the box, sort of, that's what has allowed for this titled existence to be. And, I'll give you an example. Dinesh, you were single, you were, solo dadding it, and I was solo momming it to 4 kiddos. Like, I had my 2, I have a lot of nieces and nephews, but I had 2 of them with my own 2. And we had Manish had made this remark. He goes, "Oh, why is the housekeeper coming before the kids are coming? The house is just going to go to wreck." And I was like, I'm going to elect to have her come because I know that the physical space is going to hype me up, even though I can self-manage, even though I know how to, manage my mind and things like that. Why make that something that sets me up to be more triggered than I need to be? And then we were sweeping up the kitchen this morning, and my husband said, he just kind of made a remark in passing, like, "Oh, this got really messy." And I thought to myself, yeah, but you know what? It was such a gift to be able to be like, you know what? She'll be back next week. Go ahead, kid. You want to eat sprinkles with your pancakes out of a bowl and like touch everything everywhere? Be my guest. Like, I don't have to own that responsibility. Like, I can just have fun with you because I know that I can clean it up when you guys are playing together. I can ask you guys for help. I can empower you to help me, or I can just not do it, knowing that somebody else is going to come in. And I think it models for the kids. You mentioned modeling, that it's okay to get help for them, even. Like, what a beautiful life skill that I love that you're mentioning the help. I wanted to expand Dinesh's question because I said at the beginning of the show that this episode was also for people who don't have kids, how does this matter to them? How can we expand it to them? Why are we talking about this? Like, what can they get out of this conversation? I would love for you to kind of share.
Well, I think this speaks to both what you and Dinesh were saying, which is that parenting is actually leadership training ground, right? I think it's an incredible place of growth and self growth. I think we have, sadly, and we see this with the birth rates declining, right, in this country, in part because of the cost of raising children in this country. But I also think parenthood has gotten really bad PR, right? Like, we have an entire generation of young people in their 20s who are looking at parenthood or 30s and thinking, like, I don't know, that doesn't seem so fun. We keep hearing you're going to lose yourself in parenthood. And I would
Mhm.
say to them, and I think what's really interesting about these sort of more nuanced conversations is that it is another life chapter, and it is not going to look like the freedom or sort of the same sort of goal oriented nature of your career in your 20s and 30s, but it's going to be really perspective giving. It's going to be real. It's going to ask of you really deep and personal growth. You're going to be challenged to really find work of meaning and really rethink and re-examine your relationship to work. But I would say that's part one is I think having this dialogue around parenthood as a really interesting chapter as opposed to sort of the death knell of our careers, I think is part one. Part two, I think that we have really been handed down a very black and white construct around work. And so for that reason, people have always felt like either I'm going to work full throttle or I'm not going to work, and it's pretty black and white and there's no shades of gray. And that can feel really daunting to young women and young men who are thinking about having families and
Yeah.
wondering, like, well, how is that going to work? Like, I really want it. Why have kids if I'm not going to be with them? But also, like, I don't want to give up on my careers. And it's felt so challenging in that way. And I think what we're trying to do in our generation, I think, is put more options on the table, right? We're trying to
Hmm.
say, from a policy perspective, we want paid family leave so women can take more time to make the best and right decision.
Hmm.
We want universal health care. So maybe freelance and entrepreneurship can be a larger economy in this country. So people have more autonomy for those chapters. And I would say we want to validate and dignify career pauses as one part of a really long game
Hmm.
so that people who do feel called or need to, by the way, because of the cost of childcare to pause, don't
Hmm.
feel like that's it for them. And so I think it's those two things that I hope the younger generation can see. And I hope that even in a matter of a couple of years that we can sort of pave a way where there are just more choices on the table.
Really good. I'd like to give you the floor to speak to the parent who took a career pause, right?
Mm.
And let's say there's a mom, just we'll stereotype, we'll generalize. There's a mom who took some time off. Everything is great in the family. There's help, things like that. Kids are now approaching 13, 14, where there's more time back for the mom. And they would like to do something. They would like to maybe go back to paid work, start a business, or do something. But the predominant question that I hear that is preventing the doing of the something is, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know. It was so long ago. I don't know what skills I have. I don't want to go back to like an entry level position. I'm not just finding the thing that's right for me. And I do admit that I have a little bit of a luxury and privilege to now pick the thing that I really, really want to do. But that conversation has been going on for 2 years or 3 years.
Hmm.
And they're just stuck. They're just in like this analysis paralysis of what do I do? And I don't really feel like I fit in that world that I left.
Hmm.
And there's this whole world in front of me, all the different things I can do, but I'm not really doing anything. What permission would you give them if you could speak directly down the barrel of the camera here and share some thoughts?
So, I'm so glad you asked because, when we were talking about sort of the arc of the book, there's sort of the preparing and the identity and the finances, and there's the sort of setting yourself to thrive. And my hope is that as more and more women step into a pause, they're holding their own goals to grow alongside, right? And so they've sort of kept that strategically in their mind's eye and they've not sort of counted themselves out. But for the women who are now at that place of reentry. I think there's a few sort of myths to dismantle. One is that I think a lot of women fear that their network has died in motherhood, when in reality, you're like, for the majority of women, their pools of people that they've interacted with has actually expanded, right? Whether it's the PTA, whether it's the people in their community, whether it's the people they're just seeing in their daily rhythms, their network has still been growing. And I think it's really important to use time to meet with the women or other parents who are accessible to you, and set yourself those goals, whether that's once a week I'm going to go to coffee with someone in our school community, or I'm going to start going, I'm going to join a workout class, and I'm going to see if I can, there's a woman near, that is interesting to me. I'm going to proactively like get curious about what she does. I think casting a net in the spaces that are available to us and proactively seeking out people of interest to learn from them, I think what is one of the gifts of this stage of life, because I can speak for myself. When I stepped out of, tech startups and into playgrounds and baby classes and PTAs, I actually ended up widening my circle and meeting really interesting people. Like there's a lot of networking that can happen, a drop off, but reframing it as that and knowing that you don't have to be quote unquote just a mom in that context. You can also use those relationships to grow is part one. And you can get really strategic about that when you're in sort of career exploration and really frame it as, I want to get curious about how you spend time. I think the part two is, as you're canvassing this stage of life, and you mentioned privilege, you don't have to just re-enter exactly what you were doing. If you're at a place where you don't necessarily want to go back, there is something to be said for using again what's available to you to explore where your interests are. So maybe that's volunteering more in the school community or another organization and trying on a lot of different hats. I have this incredible story of a woman I interviewed in the Bay Area, like you described, had 15 years out of the workforce, started just systematically volunteering in different roles, and realized that the one that lit her up the most was in event planning. And she ended up taking an internship and eventually finding her way back into an event marketing firm. There was another one who had previously been in government grants, who ended up becoming a preschool teacher's assistant. And like that was, that was really what she discovered in sort of spending her time and lending it in that way. But I always use the example too of, we're living at a time of so much digital access. So even things that we give a lot of flack, like Instagram, right? If you go through your Instagram and see what accounts you follow, it actually leaves a lot of clues. The content you consume leaves clues as to what you're interested in. You're following a lot of interior design accounts or family policy accounts that might, start to tee you up. I also, and I love this example of a woman actually in North Carolina who just started taking stock. And I tell everyone to do this, but take stock of just the small and big things that you're doing, the things you're proud of. And they might seem like small things, right? Like facilitated bus route for school, for teen school trip, right? And then at the end, you start to be able to reflect on not just, oh, those are my interests, but also those are what I'm good at. That's when I felt like I was in flow. And this woman ended up going back into project management after sort of 2 years of chronicling those things. And so a lot of it is that sort of self-study and active putting yourself out there and giving yourself sort of marked goals quarter over quarter. They don't have to be huge goals, but they can be one coffee, one online class. They just need to be measurable and they need to be forward moving. And I'm happy at any time to also share that we have, whether it's on Mother Untitled or it's on project platforms like the Mom Project, there are a lot of great resources out there, like resume writers and career coaches who can really help, if you do have access, just to be able to sort of tell your story to yourself, to sharpen, sometimes we just need accountability and we need a sounding board, because it is a big life transition. And I think if you've taken this time away from the traditional workforce, what we see in the data is that the thing we rank almost above salary is flexibility and meaning. And I think it's, if you're able, that's a wonderful thing to tap into.
That's really, really a great answer. Thank you. If I could add one or two other things by way of advice I've given,
Great.
the next chapter, when you're finishing the stay-at-home pause chapter, doesn't need to be something of world impact
Mhm.
type of gravity, because I think a lot of times, like, okay, I'm coming back into the workforce. I left at the top or near the top, and I've got to re-enter and do something really impactful and big for my first one. And I think that that in itself creates this pressure which keeps people stuck. And the other thing that that I like what you said is, just dabbling in a bunch of things and also almost treating it as, you're now coming back out of college or whatever,
Mhm.
and not being afraid of seeing as a failure or being foolish, because I think we all went through that in
Mhm.
how we built our careers when we started, right? And I think, and whether it's from a parenting pause or a complete career shift, I think we have to give ourselves the permission to be a beginner all over again and
Mhm.
not lose the joy in that, because the flip is a really serious approach that could not be as much fun, right?
Yeah, I love that. And a lot of what you shared, Neha, involves, I mean, you said this so beautifully. Your growth matters alongside. It's not just whether your kid is, hitting those developmental milestones within those first year or, however old they are. Your growth matters. Your leadership as the parent, whether you're at home or not at home, your leadership skills are being elevated. And it's such an empowering message that you share about making this an opportunity for you to grow, making this your personal playground of growth and experimentation. And I think the thing I would add to all the richness you both provided is move forward with kindness for yourself. Like you alluded to this, Dinesh, but really, even this morning, I had my yoga teacher come to my house and he set me up and did all this stuff. And I was staying in this pose and my nervous system, whoosh, just dropped. Right. And I was sharing with him, when you came to the house, I was in a quote unquote great space. I felt happy and easeful and connected. But I didn't know there was another level of even more ease, even more flow, even more open curiosity. It's always there, but we just have to move with caution and support ourselves to be able to do that. So, yeah.
Neha, you're such a wealth of knowledge. We're so glad that you spent some time with us. We do have a wrap up tradition before we let you go. Are you up for it?
I think so.
All
We'll
Okay.
right,
see.
sounds good. Yeah, no, I think you're up for the challenge. I think you're up for a lot of big challenges, and the book is going to be your smallest act of your life. I think you've got big things coming your way. Our first question is, we live in a world where we want results today, and whether it's related to your work that we talked about today or just in general, share with us something from the life of Neha Ruch that we can all implement today to make our lives slightly better.
Whenever you're up against a new season, might suggest the phrase right now. Like right now I'm making this choice.
Mm,
Right. I think that those two words have given me so much peace when I was initially pausing, and I knew that it was really a pause that was gonna lead into this next version. I think it took the pressure off.
Yeah.
mhm.
And I think now, actually, ironically, as I sort of have dialed up my work out of the home to build this movement ahead of the book launch, there are moments I feel really, a little bit sad or a little bit down, especially sort of in the shift and dynamic of not picking up my kids like I used to, right? And I think that the words still are serving me really well, this idea of right now, because I'm sort of knowing that I get to recalibrate in just, 6 months or so.
Yeah, so good.
That's incredible and super helpful, even very easily implementable.
Mhm.
Neha, as you know, we have a game on this show called Ask It Forward. Our previous guest, not knowing who was going to come on next, has asked a question. And Neha, you get to answer this question, and then you get to leave a question for the next guest. So this question is from comedian and musical artist Anjali Bulkley. If you had to give your younger version of yourself some advice, knowing what you know now, what would you say?
Tell her that it's all going to work in the end. That there's so much fear sometimes, that especially in your teens, right? It feels so colossal, or your 20s. It just feels, whatever it is, whether it's a breakup or whether it's not getting into the college that you thought you were going to go to, right? Like it just seems so colossal, and it's just one part, and it always just leads to the next version of who you're meant to be. So trusting in that unfolding has been something that I think parenting has given me. This choice sort of gave me, and that I wish I'd had it then, but I hope someone will hear that when they need to.
Beautiful. Well, with that, what would you ask of our next guest?
What is that deep thing that they're working on? And then, what they're doing to help work through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great question. We always ask our listeners to ask these questions of themselves because they're such great questions.
I
All
think
right,
it's on
Neha.
top of mind for me because I'm actually, it's the thing I miss the most of sort of fully pausing is I did feel like I had room for a lot of personal growth. And so I'm interested in that again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question to ask at any time, at any phase of our life.
Yeah.
Neha, thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for spending some time with us. And we know you're super busy with the book launch, but at the Happy and Human podcast, one way that we try to show our gratitude for you spending time with us is to make a contribution to an organization that uniquely you care a lot about. And we hope that it raises awareness with our listeners and even people who may not even know that the show exists can benefit from our time together. So we'd like to invite you to share a organization or cause that you care about, and Seema and I will make a contribution to.
That is so generous. And I can tell you, I've been on a lot of these and I've never heard anything like this. I'm really grateful. And the organization is Welcome Baby. They borrowed from the model of the Scandinavian countries where mothers in need are given a box of first month baby essentials so that they can leave the hospital and feel like their children have a safe place to sleep, food to eat, and diapering. And at least that will hopefully help and aid the transition into parenthood because, as we know, it's colossal.
It's huge. And I'm so glad there's someone giving the essentials. I wish someone gave an instruction manual when we had our kids.
Yeah.
I
If
remember.
you find one, you let me know.
I'll share a real quick story. So my son was born. My wife had a C-section. They're in the bassinet. I'm sleeping. And the first night, right? First night you're being a dad, a nurse runs in, says, "Oh my God, he is choking." And she does something and leaves. And I'm like looking at my wife like, I don't know how to replicate if to know he was choking or not. Like I know she did something, but I didn't know she knew that. I was like, what do we do? Like, how do we know if he's choking again? We never got an answer. So I love that someone's doing something.
What was he choking on?
I have no idea still. I think maybe there was like saliva or something in his mouth, or I have no idea.
That's quite terrifying.
It's funny because his wife is a pediatrician. Like they're well equipped to handle
Yeah. You have the playbook. Give me the playbook.
Yeah. Like just like hook a brother up. Like tell me, like, how did you know? So I can know.
Oh,
Anyways.
I remember trying to prove that I was so competent. So I refused to take the swaddling. The nurse was like, and then push came to shove and we were leaving the hospital. And I was just like, what is this fabric? What I was just staring at it. I just remember staring at it and being like, oh, I think this was the ego check I needed. And I think that's parenthood general, just the ego check we all need.
So funny. Parenthood gives us a lot of funny stories. Oh, Neha, I know that you've got lots of full things, amazing, impactful things planned for the rest of your day. So I don't want to keep you, but I did not want to wrap up without our listeners knowing where to find you. Tell us a little bit about the book so they can get their hands on it. It's going to change millions of lives, I'm sure. I have no doubt. Go ahead and share.
I appreciate it. So the Power Pause is out on January 14, 2025. You can pre-order it now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. Or you can come to motheruntitled.com/thepowerpause. And for anyone who pre-orders, you can access the first chapter. And I love the first chapter because it really tackles the identity piece. So everything from the history of how did we arrive at some of these stigmas, which just reminds you you're not alone, and all the way through sort of interactive exercises to help you start to navigate with clarity and confidence. The first section is really around preparing. So finances, identity, resigning. The middle section is about setting yourself up to thrive, goal setting, rhythms and routines, getting help. And then that last section is about really unlocking the full possibility. So everything from networking to finding that hobby and then ultimately returning with confidence.
So good. Where were you 12 years ago when I was lost and alone? Oh my goodness.
Well, lost and alone as well, but we all ultimately found each other, and so our girls and our daughters will, and our sons will.
And our boys. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much
So
so.
good. So good. Neha, thank you so much. And we'll you're on Instagram as well. You've got a huge following over there.
You can follow us at Mother Untitled.